we have not a whiteboard, but a light board. You know what a light board is?
I had a smart board in my classroom.
Nope,
but
a light board. A light board is when you can stand up and I can write and it comes across. I can write Iron Man, and it looks like I'm writing, it's clear. So, but it mirrors it back so the person on video can see it and it's coming, so it looks like you're just writing in the air just like this, and it's coming through correctly to them. It's really cool. We bought one for each school for COVID to have the flipped classroom teaching. It was really interesting. Yeah,
that is very interesting.
It's really cool. I don't think it's being used that much this year, but if you're doing lessons ahead of time, it's a good thing. They're very expensive, but COVID.
When I was teaching, we had, do you remember the ITV systems that were in the school?
Yep.
And nobody was using them. So adult ed kind of was like, let's start using them for all of our stuff. So I ended up being their like ITV teacher for adult ed. Like, teaching other teachers how to do it. And it was such a cool class.
Yeah.
I found it distant, like the biggest challenge was it was a different level of teaching. You had to be like the director, and you had to keeping people organized into what you're talking about was so much different than teaching in a classroom. It was such a different level, and if you're just standing there kind of doing the same thing, obviously your students are going to get bored. They're looking how to keep them engaged.
Exactly.
And it was a great for me as I always had like imposter syndrome as a teacher because I kind of happened into it and never felt really confident. I didn't have a teaching degree behind me. And it was a great way. I got a lot better at teaching because doing that.
Because you were modeling it too. And that's what my job is now. So I love that because it raises the bar. And if I'm telling them they have to have their, learning targets, or if they need to have, success criteria for their students, I better have it before I start talking to them. So that's really interesting. And last year I did remote teaching. I was in charge of the remote teachers, and so I tried really hard to model for them different things. Plus, I couldn't meet with them. They're all at home. And I was in my office or at home, and so I learned technology like the night before I taught it. So it was really fun. It was very, very interesting. I think I like that distraction where I go and have to learn something new.
Absolutely.
Yeah. But when I first started teaching, I was a very different teacher than I am now.
I wanted to ask you this.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
It's, for some reason in my mind, I thought good teaching was being very strict. And don't get me wrong, I was always strict. And I always had a lot of routines with my classes. But I'm thinking straight rows, every desk was lined up perfectly, everything was neat and clean, and the students were quiet. And so if the principal walked in my room and everyone was quiet, I thought that was good teaching. That is the worst teaching, I found out down the road. And I think that I like being organized, but students need to talk, students need to get up and move around, students need to get their hands wet and dirty to learn, just like we all do. They need to be excited about going to school, and I need to be excited about going to school too. So I always had to change things. I couldn't do the same thing always. So I think those are the keys to how I changed throughout teaching.
Was there something that happened, or how did you figure out that it wasn't working?
It was working. It just wasn't engaging, and it wasn't great learning.
I guess it probably at some point wasn't engaging for you.
It wasn't engaging for me. So if I was bored, the kids must have been bored. Yes. I think the turning point was.
Tapping too much. The mic picks up tap. I learned that in my last podcast.
No
light taps are fine, but loud taps are like bass drums.
I think it's Elaine Jones. Now, you met Elaine Jones at Burnt Island, right?
I didn't go.
Oh, you didn't go to Burnt Island. Okay. She is the mover and shaker of Burnt Island. we moved out to Monroe Road, and we were building a house. We had a bonfire in the driveway, just getting rid of some brush, and this lady drives in on two wheels, and she says, "Hi, I'm your neighbor. We're building a house down the road too." So she introduces herself, and she says, "I work for the Department of Marine Resources. I teach science classes that are recertification. Every teacher needs recertification."
Right.
So she talked me into taking one of her classes. Well, I didn't need recertification credits, but I was teaching 5th grade, and she was a nice lady.
Right.
So it was at Hampton Academy, and she'd bring in coolers full of animals, ocean animals, and each class we would take out a different phylum of animals. We'd learn all about them, and she'd like, "Oh, take the cooler to school tomorrow," because she lived right here in
Right,
town.
right.
So I'd take the cooler in, we'd ice it down, we'd take good care of it, and I fell right in love with it. The kids were so excited, and I couldn't wait to share those animals
Right.
and teach everything I had learned the night before to those students. So I really think that's what turned my straight rows and no
Right.
talking into talking, engaging, and just getting excited about whatever they wanted to do, project-based learning.
Right.
I loved it.
Yeah.
So
That Burn Island trip, that's definitely one of the things that Kaylin brought up. I mean,
yeah,
so how that, logistics-wise, that must have been a nightmare.
it was,
Right.
especially because Elaine found that I was a captive audience. So I was like, she hooked me right in. And plus she was a neighbor, our kids were friends. She was working, I think, in Hollowell at that time for the state, and she decided she needed to build an aquarium. So she found this space in Booth Bay Harbor. She got the aquarium going. She got us to come and help with the presentations with that. Then she had the aquarium going, and then she decided she needed the whole lighthouse island. So she acquired that for the Department of Marine Resources, and she kept hooking me in. And I had her youngest son in class, Ben, and not to be confused with you.
Right.
And she said, "I think we need to do something different. We need to get those kids out here overnight."
Right.
So we spent the winter planning all these activities we could do with the kids, figuring out buses and tents and all these different things, and
Right.
that's how it all developed. Years later, she had the whole education center built, and she was able to have students overnight and teacher training and all this. So she was a mover and a shaker, and I just followed her right along for
Right.
many, many years. So, but I have to give her credit for changing my teaching as a
That's
result. Yeah.
And how cool was it? So when Kaylin was going, maybe when Logan, Mr. Linderman,
Yeah,
right, had
Yeah.
gone, and
Yeah.
then a student had come and then
Yes.
to teach. That must have
Yeah.
been so cool.
it was because, as a 5th grader, Matt went, and he loved it so much. And then as a teacher, that was his big goal, was to
Yeah.
do Burnt Island. So he did it for a couple of years. He did the first year with me, and then he finally got it, so he took it over. And now he is assistant principal in Booth Bay Harbor.
Oh, really?
So he is still involved.
Wow.
So, yeah.
Booth Bay Harbor is where I started elementary school
Oh, really?
for a couple of years.
Yeah.
That was a blur for me.
Yeah.
We'll get to that too. So I'm interested in how you stay motivated as a teacher. Like, how do you keep finding, I'm sure year to year, week to week, you can have a group that's a much more challenging group that takes a lot more out of you to stay motivated every day.
Yes.
How do you
Um,
how do you address that?
I think that keeping myself engaged, doing things differently, always trying new things. I think that's it. That's the key for me. I'm not sure that's a key for everybody.
Right.
Some people are better off if they are doing something they're really confident with, but I need to get excited and try something new.
Right.
And that's where I went with the instructional coaching. So I taught 8th grade for a while, I'd say about 5 years, and then 5th grade for about 30 years. And then I went into the instructional coaching, and I was doing some of that on the side. I started off with science coaching after school, and then doing part-time
No, that's
teaching.
for like teachers.
Yeah, so profession,
Right.
it's job embedded professional development.
Yeah.
So I go into their classrooms. We talk about what they would like to see that, what they want to work on, and it's student centered. It's not teacher centered. It's not changing a teacher or making a or fixing a broken teacher.
Right,
it's
right.
nothing like that.
Right.
It's only if I'm invited also.
Right.
And so they want me there, which makes a big difference.
Right.
And they pick an area that they want to work on. So it could be looking at data and how they want to move their students forward. It could be classroom management. It could be working on their standards. It could be anything that they
Right.
want.
Right.
So.
Yeah. I got lucky. I was teaching adult ed.
Yep.
And all my students, for the most part, wanted to be there.
Right.
You know, there was, and
Yeah.
I remember kind of thinking
Yeah.
when I was, so the market had fallen apart, and I needed to find some kind of different career path. You know, architecture was not, people weren't building houses anymore, so I
Right.
needed to find something else.
Yeah.
And I'm like, okay, I've got the math, and so the state I worked with the state and got the credits I needed to be able to teach, and I landed in adult ed. I felt so lucky. I'm like, I don't know how I deal with discipline in schools, and
Yeah.
and just to have, literally, like I said, all my students had a goal. They didn't want me wasting their time. You know,
Right.
I need to learn this algebra to learn to do this. And
Mhm.
yeah, I got lucky there.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Adults are hard to work with though too. It's different. It's different.
All of, so for the most part, I mean, I guess I had some college prep students that were, they needed algebra 2 credit to get into the school they wanted to. So I had students like that.
Right.
But most of them had issues with high school.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that was a challenge for them. You know, they had been expelled from school, or you know, really negative reactions. At first, the adult, so I was in Bucksport, and the adult ed was in the elementary school, which was the coolest thing.
Yeah.
It was like we'd be in class and the little kids walking by holding hands and stuff. It just made this great atmosphere.
So it was during the school day.
Yeah.
You were there. Oh.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So it wasn't in the evening.
No, but I was a full time.
Oh, okay.
Yep, we were. Yep, pretty much school hours.
Oh, okay.
We were there. Then, so at first we were in the elementary school. Then it got moved to the high school, which was a bit problematic because these people had issues with high school and now had to be around high school kids. And
Right.
even though we were in a portable out behind, so
Mhm.
the elementary school was awesome to be in that
Yeah.
atmosphere. I heard an interesting thing. There's another podcast I listen to, Lex Friedman, who's he's from MIT. He works in computer intelligence, automated learning and stuff like that. And he grew up 13 years in Russia, and then moved here. He's around my age, maybe a little bit younger. And he was saying how the biggest difference he noticed from the Russian system to our system was as soon as they found something that you were special in, you got pulled out of your group and accelerated in that. So if you showed promise in math, you got immediately pulled out, and you were, you were put into a group of other people accelerating math.
Yeah.
And I think, and he said here a lot of times, he thinks the issue that we have is that we teach the lowest common denominator a lot of times.
Yeah.
And I know my girls, every year in math, they'd be like, we're doing the same thing we did last year. We're doing the same thing, or the class is moving so slow, it's boring. What are your thoughts on that? And how do we address that? Or
Yeah.
It's a tough thing because
that
you want
is,
everybody.
right.
I get what we're trying to do. You want everybody coming along.
Right. Well, we are required to differentiate. And if it's in the high school, they may pick courses that
Right.
are
Right.
ability
Right.
grouped. On the lower grades, we try to do smaller groups, but it's always a challenge because you do need to, what we're trying to do is instead of accelerate them, we're trying to get them thinking and have it wider. So let's say let's do the algebra. So algebra, instead of going faster and just getting through the book, going wider with that concept and
Right.
having the thinking deeper.
Right.
So that's the key. It's trying, because that way they're not going so fast that they're skipping things either.
Right.
So it's hard.
Yeah.
That's hard. But that's why small groups and a lot of the coaching I do right now is with teachers who are trying to get a small group going here and then having the rest of the class doing something
Right.
different.
Right.
But
And
that is a challenge.
But you can see how your once more rigid classroom
Right.
didn't fit that.
It did
what
not
you
fit that
adapted
at
to.
all. No.
Right. Right.
And getting the students in small groups and talking, you could actually, because you're not, let's take math again, because I've done a lot of work actually with math, is if you get the students talking and discussing their thinking and how they solve a problem instead of just procedural and saying, memorizing the steps,
Right.
and by them sharing with each other, hopefully they're teaching their peers and they're learning from their peers because we all think different.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that.
Yeah, an example of that is I resisted with my husband playing cribbage for years and years and years because he's like the cribbage guru.
Right.
And I'm like, I can't do all that math in my head. It's just cribbage. You're only counting to 15. So
7 plus 8.
yeah,
right.
and 6 and 9. So
Right.
you learn that. So finally, a couple years ago, I'm like, okay, I'll play with you or at camp.
Right.
Nothing else was going on. And so we started having conversations about how you're thinking about numbers and how you're pairing numbers.
Right.
And I can sometimes beat them now.
Right.
But that gets us to students and student thinking. And if we can get those students showing that if they have an image of math, and we're doing this with K1-2 right now, images, and then they talk about their reasoning and their thinking and what they see for numbers
Right.
within that dialogue helps everyone,
Right.
no matter if you're advanced or low.
Right.
And there's a whole concept called number talks, where you start every class off just talking about the numbers or the image or how you solve the
Right.
problem. So I think that's kind of the solution
Right.
to some of those problems. But I think also in high school, you are going to have some students go further
Right.
and want to go deeper.
Right. Right.
So
Yeah.
they are more ability grouped
Right.
later on.
Right. Yeah. I know when I started teaching math, I learned it at such a different level than I ever knew it before.
Right.
You know, because you have
Yeah.
to,
Right.
you know, I got to engage
Yeah.
with my student, and
Yeah.
and like you said, they're thinking about it a different way. So now I have to change my way to match their way to see how they're getting through to help them
Right.
solve.
Yeah.
And once again, I got lucky in adult ed because for the most part it's one-on-one, or I'd be teaching 3 classes, but I only had 3 students.
Yeah.
And I'd just be bouncing between them and
Yeah.
interacting between them. And
Yeah. But think how much you learn by listening to their thinking.
right. And I know I see my girls helping other students that are struggling
Mhm.
in something, and they're having to do that. So they are learning at a different level.
Yeah.
It's keeping them from getting to the higher levels of math earlier, I
Mhm.
guess. But they're learning their foundation so much
Right,
better,
right.
which is also as valuable as
Yeah.
getting farther along too.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not all about speed. A lot of times, if you have someone who excels in math at a young age, it's because they've memorized a procedure, not because they
Right.
understand the math
Right.
better.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. My students used to get so frustrated with me because I would every day, like we'd go back to fractions, I'd show them a different way. And like, okay, we're gonna do it like
Yeah.
And they're like, why do I have to learn so many different ways? I'm like, I want you to understand it. I don't want you
Right.
to learn the procedure.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I used to teach division, multiply, subtract, bring down, multiply, subtract, bring down. They weren't learning anything. They were just learning Then we go math, serious business, math, serious business. So it was a mnemonic device.
Right.
That's not good either. So
Right.
that's when they were all sitting in the rows.
Right. What was there was a flip and multiply in fractions or something like that.
Yeah.
And every student I have always wanted to flip everything. They just wanted, they didn't know why they were flipping it. They just knew that flipping was something that they did.
Oh, right. Yeah.
So they were
right.
always confused.
Right, right.
It's because
yeah,
they didn't
flip the fraction. Yeah.
they didn't understand. You know,
of course not.
So it was,
yeah.
yeah. And in adult ed, I quickly learned that that's like, oh, teaching somebody, it works like adding fractions and multiplying fractions, the difference between them. And they'll learn the one rule when they're in it, but then they get to the other one, and then once they're removed from it, they forget and they mix up the rules because they didn't really learn.
Exactly.
They didn't really understand.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I think a lot of times that we tend to teach like we learned.
Right. Right.
Because what else do we know? So until we kind of get outside the box there,
Yeah.
you don't know. You don't know what you don't know.
Yeah. I got so lucky. It was probably 5th, 6th grade. I remember I was in a classroom and we basically had there was 3 tiers. You know, the smartest students, the middle,
Right,
and the
right, yeah.
lowest. And
That's the way I was in middle school
Right.
or junior high back then.
Right, exactly. And I was definitely in the lower tier because school was a blur to me at that age. Like I wasn't. That's something I want to get to too. But I happened to be. I remember clearly being in Mrs. Dufour's class and sitting there, and the math. I could see what she was teaching. I'm like, why aren't we just doing it this way? Like, why do I have to do all this when I can just get to the answer this way? And
Right.
I remember her like, Ben, can you stay after class? And I figured I was in trouble, of course. You
Right,
know?
of course.
And she's like, you don't belong in this class. And she went to bat for me. But they didn't really, the school didn't have a way to have somebody in different tiers. Like, how can you be in a higher tier of math, but not in the lower tier?
Oh, right, yeah.
No, it was just.
It's a logistic problem.
Right.
Yeah.
And somehow she got me out of that. And a similar thing happened in middle school where I remember that teacher, similar kind of thing happened. And all of a sudden I went from being in the low middle tier to being with the super smart kids in the school. Like, oh, I don't belong here.
Yeah.
I remember
Imposter syndrome.
being so intimidated that I was in the class. We're doing trigonometry. I just came out of like adding and subtracting. Yeah. I mean, I got lucky there.
Good.
And that's the one thing. But
yeah.
since I'm on the topic, I'm so lucky. I feel so lucky to have girls, and that they don't take after me. And I feel like looking at it, school was made for the way Kaylin and Logan are, and it so wasn't for me as a young boy. My first chunky years was just a blur. I mean, I was ADD before ADD was a thing. I don't think I was somebody that bounced around. I wasn't like out of control, but paying attention for long periods of time was just not where I was maturity wise. And then middle school was all, girls. That's all my focus was. And being funny and whatever I had to do.
Yeah.
And it wasn't till like my junior year probably that I started. Oh, I need to start paying attention. And I was able to pay attention.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that? On girls and boys and it's such a tough.
It is, yeah.
You don't want to separate them.
No.
But they learn so different. Like I wondered to myself, like, so I've thought maybe if my parents bribed me more, if I had a carrot at the end.
Yeah.
So I ended up bribing my girls, and they'd be like, "Oh yeah, Dad, you owe me money." Like it was never their motivation.
Right.
They didn't need that. They were going to get the grades they were going to get.
Yeah. Yeah, I don't think they needed to be bribed.
Right, and I look at myself now, like I exercise every morning. I feel great for exercising. Won't get into that, but if I got my energy out of my system early in the morning or something like that.
Yeah.
But I don't know if that would.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think every person's different. I hate to stereotype between girls and boys.
Right. It's
but
generalized.
I also, there are girls that have attention problems.
Oh, absolutely.
And there are boys that don't. But it does. There are definitely, avenues that we could stereotype. I don't know.
But even if we're just put in general, the kids that can't pay attention, they can't keep their attention, even though you can clearly tell, like, I would get decent grades on tests because I could pay attention enough to be able to do it, but I never did homework. I never, you would not like me as a student.
You're probably the little boy that needed the box of books to take to the office, and then the office calls and you have to take the box of books back to the classroom just for a little walk halfway through.
You're probably right. Yeah.
Yeah, some little tricks like that, but
Yeah.
I'm watching the kids. I've been working in a kindergarten classroom, which is completely out of my element, and I'm having such a good time in there right now. And it seems like it's 50-50 with the boys and girls right now. But middle school, the boys do seem like they're maybe 50% of them are really want that leadership role, and that could be acting out the way to get there. But in high school, they sometimes calm down a little bit too.
Right.
So.
Right. Yeah, and I had sports in high school. Sports, there was, if you had bad grades, you weren't on the sports team. So I didn't want that to happen. And then around my junior year, there was the, if you got good enough grades, you could have an honor pass, and then you'd have to go to study hall.
Oh, wow.
I was like, okay, that's the carrot I need.
Yeah.
But that was enough to motivate me.
Oh, there's your bribery.
Yeah. Right, exactly. Well, that's why I
didn't
thought
have
it
to
would
be
work.
money.
I didn't have, I could save a lot of money on my girls. Report cards would come out, I'd be like, oh no, how much did I say I was going to give them?
That's funny. That's funny.
One thing that came up just a couple days ago, which I was thinking about, and I think when I was teaching adult ed, IEPs were just starting to become kind of a thing.
Mm-hmm.
It probably was a thing more in regular school, but we tailored our education to everybody anyways, so it wasn't really something that we had to deal with. But there was an interesting thing. So Keon, one of my daughters, one of the students left class to go take a test. So like the students were all together, it was test time, and she was able to go to a separate classroom and take her test, which I completely understand why that is. But I've always felt like you need to challenge your weaknesses. Not, if you have a strength, and I'm making a lot of assumptions on this student, which I have no idea. This could not be the case, but I'm guessing she has some anxiety about taking tests in a group.
Right.
My initial thought is, well, then we need to keep her in groups a lot. Right. to strengthen that weakness. Like I was a poor reader for a long time. I need to strengthen my reading. I didn't need more math help where I was already good. Do you feel like IEPs kind of work that way?
I don't
even know if I'm using the right
term. I think
it
depends on the person, because I think we do need to challenge ourselves, and that's you and I both like to challenge ourselves, do things that are really hard,
right,
or things that we're not good at. That's why I swim sometimes, because I'm not good at it. But I think also depends on the reason for giving the test. So if you're giving a test to see if they know the content or if they're understanding the material, and that's the way they will shine, maybe. If your goal is to help them later in life meet challenges, then... Which is kind of the goal, right? That is, yeah.
I remember speech class for Logan was traumatic.
Really?
She had such... and it didn't help that Kayla's like, it's the easiest A ever. Like, why? And Logan's in tears. Just
right.
But that she got through that made her better.
Right.
It
depends on your goal.
Right.
And if the IEP goal is to find out if they know the math, then they probably should be in a conditioned area that they can show the math. But if it's just lifelong learning, and what are our goals? It could be any of those. So maybe that's what needs to be taken into consideration with how many times are you taking a test right now, day in, day out? Right. I don't know.
Right.
How many people are taking adults? Some are. And I don't know, I'm a better test taker now than I used to be.
Right.
But I don't think it would have made a difference if I was in a small group or a big group.
Right. I had one student that, she was one of my success stories. She was trying to take the GED, which by the time she got done, wasn't the GD anymore, it's the high set, or I can't remember now, but in class, she knew the information, and she'd take that test and fail it.
Yeah.
Over and over and over. She must have taken it 6 or 7 times.
Yeah.
And it's like, it was so hard to like go over the information, and we'd try to make her uncomfortable, and that we'd have other students around her and try, and she finally passed it. I was quite proud of her for never giving up, because she'd take the test and we wouldn't see her for a month because she feels like a failure.
Right, of course.
And sometimes we'd call her or send her an email, and then she'd come back in and we'd build up again. Yeah, that's
hard. And the opposite extreme happens too. You have some people who are just really good at taking tests, and either they've just memorized it quickly and they forget it the next day, or they just are good at reading the questions and whether they know the content or not. So that's another whole issue too.
I was a confident test taker. Because I think from years of just not knowing the information and having to find another way to get by.
Yeah. Well, if you read the question, they say always or never, know that.
Right. What would you recommend for new teachers?
Oh. I actually have the privilege of working with all the new teachers in the district every year for the last 4 years, I guess. And I think that teachers need to know right off the bat that we don't all teach like we learned, because there's still people who are used to learning through lecture, and instead of the teacher talking, the students need to talk. That's my big thing. And questioning techniques, they need to ask open-ended questions that get the students thinking.
Right.
So I would say those are the major things: student thinking and student talking. Having student-led classrooms, especially older students.
Right.
But even those kindergartners and first and second graders learn to talk, and they're learning routines to talk, and practicing their talking, and having strategies with that. So I think going in that direction right off the bat every single year makes their life easier, and their students' learning just elevates.
I remember, so in college, I was like a BC student, and I jumped to being an A student, like overnight. And the reason was there was this girl in my class, Sonia, who showed up to class without a notebook. And I was like, she's so much of a badass.
Yeah, she memorizes everything, right?
Well, I stopped taking notes not long after that, and I jumped to being an A student overnight. And it was... my notes, I remember like being drilled into me in school, and this is just to illustrate how some of the ways we've done things don't always have these perfect notes, and my notes always look perfect. My spacing, my bracket, my bullet points, but I was spending so much mental focus on getting my notes perfect, I wasn't absorbing the information. And I'm such a visual learner, sitting there and paying attention to a teacher and listening to them and following the story, whether it's a social studies class or what.
Right.
When I stopped taking, now I still had I had a daily planner for, okay, this is an important date, or need to do this, or whatever. There was some highlights that I would obviously still take down. But once I stopped taking notes, which I would not recommend to most students, but that after that, my grades across the board and everything went up.
Right. Yeah. Because everybody learns differently.
Right.
I'm kind of halfway in between. I can write some things down, but I need to be a good listener. I'd be best off videotaping it, watching it again. Right. That's why the flipped classroom would work well for me, is have a video, listen to it, then listen to it again, take a few notes, and then go over my notes if I could listen to it a third time.
I remember, and I never done this, and my mother got her master's in education. Oh, no, it was a doctorate, but one of the advanced degrees from UMaine, and I remember she used to have a tape recorder. It's before video, but she used to tape.
Yeah.
And then she obviously would come home and study with the tape recorder.
Oh, that's good. Yeah.
Which, it makes sense. But I never did that. I never found the discipline that she had.
So she learned the same way you did.
I'm guessing so.
Yeah.
I would love to. Yeah. I need to ask her about that. It's just one of those memories that. So I guess we've already covered what you're doing now. You really love what you're doing now,
I
right?
do. I love it because it's not full time either.
Oh, that's nice.
Yeah, it's 0.6. So I have tomorrow and Friday off.
Yeah, and you're working with teachers, which is a different
Yep.
kind
Yeah,
of.
but I'm in the classroom with students. This is my
Right, so-
Last
so
year
it's
was
like a
hard.
hybrid.
Last year was hard because of the remote, and so I had 14 remote teachers, and I was working with them basically full time, and then sometimes with the new teachers, but basically on the computer all day long, and I found that really challenging.
I bet.
Because I do like to talk to people and I really miss the kids, and it was hard.
Right.
It was really hard, especially the high school students. They were home and they were lonely, and a lot of their friends were back in school because they were hybrid. I'm talking the fully remote students every
Right.
5 days a week. That was just so hard. And even like the K1-2 kids, they had to learn how to use the computer. Their parents had to be there. It was just really hard for everybody.
Hard on the parents, and then that
Yeah.
trickles down to them. That the kids are
Right.
feeling the pressure too. And
Right. And some of those kids who were kindergarten or first grade are having a really hard time being back in full time now too,
Right.
because we don't have any remote this year.
Right.
So
I read an article in Brewer. I think they found that they had some students had success remotely.
right, yeah,
And did quite well. So
Right.
they're trying to open that up for some students.
yeah,
And I know there's some classes that you need to be there and some that you don't. When I was getting my college credits to teach the couple classes I needed to have,
Mhm.
I took some remote classes then.
yeah,
And I think I had to take trigonometry in the Eastern Maine Community College, and I did in like 2 weeks. I remember the
Mhm.
teacher like, "You
Yeah.
need the final already? I haven't
Yeah.
even written the midterm." Yeah.
yeah.
But it was so nice to be able to accelerate through classes.
Because you were doing it asynchronously, so you were doing it. It was self-paced,
Right.
right?
Which was really nice because
Yeah,
I had the syllabus, I knew what I had to do, all the class, all the
Right.
things, and it was just,
Yeah.
and I had a timeline, like, I had the teaching job, I could start teaching at a certain date, but I needed to have my certificate by then, my conditional certificate at
Right,
the time,
yeah.
so
right.
I had a timeline.
You were motivated,
I was
yeah.
motivated to
Yeah.
get through, but
Mm.
I saw my girls too, that really worked. Certain classes, they excelled in that,
Mhm. Right.
and it's such, I know, math-wise, there was so much they had to teach themselves.
Mhm.
You know, there's no teacher that they can ask a direct question. They want to finish it tonight, and
Right.
they had to figure it out. They had to work
Right.
through it, it was. I think there was a lot of pain involved that they had
Yeah.
to get through, but I think they learned at a different level.
That's right, because they had that. It was student centered, and
Right.
it was. They had to be. They had to be the leaders of their
Right.
learning. So.
Right. Yeah, but there was also a lot of mess. I can't even imagine what it was like for you guys last year.
Well,
And
some of the high
just-
school students looked at the spring before when we just shut down all of a sudden, and we were just struggling to get curriculum out to students and such, and they kind of envisioned that's what it would be.
Right.
So when this was much more academic for the full year, they were a little surprised.
Right.
They thought they were going to sit home and watch TV, I
Right.
think.
Right.
So not all of them, don't get me wrong at all, because
Right.
there were some students, like you said, really
Yeah.
excelled with that, but there were others that
Yeah.
showing up or sleeping in bed, that was really difficult for a lot of them.
I look at myself and how I don't know how I would have fared in a situation like that. Yeah, I wasn't disciplined like my girls are,
Yeah,
on their own.
right, so, yeah. Hey, you're just lucky.
I was so lucky because they don't take after me.